verses 7 and 8 of the book of James, chapter 1. Go ahead and read those two verses and we'll go from there. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So our passage tonight, if we want to think about it in the context of what we've already talked about in the first chapter of the book of James, it's going to be related to the trials that we face and the testing of our faith. James encourages us in these first few verses to be steadfast, perfect, and complete, lacking nothing, and not doubting when it comes to our faith in God. And then out to our verses tonight, verses 7 and 8, it's talking about those who struggle to do that are called double-minded. Now, what do you picture when you think of being double-minded? Does anybody like to have anybody refer to them as being a double-minded person? What do you feel? What do you experience yourself when you've caught yourself being a double-minded man or a double-minded woman, whatever situation is going on in your life, and you find yourself being a double-minded person about something? You get a feeling that it's kind of unstable, right? Have we had that go on in our lives before where we just can't seem to lock in on which way we're headed? We might do something this way or feel something about this way, and the next thing we know, we're back over here on this side feeling or doing something totally different. Sometimes we can't make up our minds which way we're headed, and sometimes we become that double-minded person. Have you ever seen some videos out on YouTube where it shows a huge ship or a freighter or something like that that's out in the ocean in the big storm? It talks about that here in these passages. But these boats that look like they're just going to get swallowed up in these huge waves. And it says that here. It says, but let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. You can see those huge waves just being blown and going everywhere. And everything in that, when you picture that, is turbulent, especially that ship that's being tossed around in those waves. It just looks like sometimes you're just batting down the hatches and hoping for the best because it seems like it's totally out of control. And you see the large waves splashing over the boat, and it just looks like it's going to swallow it up. But when you see that illustration that's used in verse 6, there's nothing stable about that situation at all. You know, if we're struggling to make up our minds and we're just waffling back and forth, there's a lot of conflict in our lives when that happens, isn't there? The double-minded man is struggling because of weak faith, doubting, and instability. We see that in verses 5 through 8. Talking about that, it says, he is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. We're talking about asking God for things in faith with no doubting. That is something that we struggle with, isn't it? So what happens to us when we become the double-minded man? A lot of things that characterize that can be a lack of peace. When we're going back and forth on something, when we're torn between two different things or more than that, there's a lack of peace in our lives. There's indecisiveness. We have a lot of conflict going on in our lives. We can feel lost and alone. What do we often want in our lives? We want stability. We want to feel like we have a strong foundation or strong footing in whatever we're doing, in the direction we go in our lives. We often want to have a rock in our lives, don't we? Something that we feel like that we're locked in and we have something stable that we can hang our hat on. You know, I want to think about Ephesians 6, verse 4, where it says, where fathers are told to not to provoke their children to anger, but to raise them up in the discipline and the instruction or the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Why is that said? What happens to a child in this situation where it's talking about having our children provoked to anger? Well, in that situation, it's not training these children, not giving them something consistent, and they just don't know which way to go. They're tossed back and forth. One moment they're in big trouble for something, and then maybe some other time for the same thing, there is no retribution for that. They grow up not knowing where they're headed and what to build their foundation on. It's always moving. It's a moving target. And that frustrates children. That's what it says here in Ephesians. That's that double-minded feeling, isn't it? That they just don't know what's up. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." You ever found yourself in that situation when we think about our spiritual lives? We're fighting that battle between our spiritual life and our carnal lives, or physical lives, aren't we? And I tell you, I may speak for you. I know, look for myself. If I feel like I'm strong and locked in on serving God the way I ought to, you can find peace. But when you get weak in that, and you're getting caught up in other things in this world, then that conflict starts up, isn't it? You know that you're not serving God the way you should. You need to get it straightened out. But if you just constantly go back and forth, well, I'm found myself being a little too worldly here. Oh, I'm going to go back over here and try to get strong spiritually, and next thing you know, you're going back and forth. That's the double-minded man. Who do we want to serve? And I think we can see that. In verse 7, the warning James gives us is that the double-minded person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. And that's a sobering thought, isn't it? We talk about, we go to God in prayer, and we want to serve him, and we want to know that he's going to help us. But it says the double-minded person isn't guaranteeing that they're going to receive anything from the Lord. Why is that? You ever been like on a team, a sports team or something like that? Everybody's saying, we got to unite. We have to be all united for this cause. And if you're not united, don't even be on the team, right? Whether it's that or you're working on a job, if you're not going to hold up your part of the deal, if you're not invested in this, are you going to get the benefit that you might hope? God wants us to be all in, and he wants us to serve him and give ourselves wholly to him, not to go back and forth. And that is a pretty sobering thought. We must make our minds up about something, especially of a spiritual nature. If we don't, we're just going to be floating around all the time. The phrase, you got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. That kind of deal. So, that applies to us as Christians. We need to be like Joshua in Joshua 24:15. Where it says, "And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." I don't see any double-mindedness in Joshua there. We saw what happened to those who, when they sent the spies out who were ready to give up. But Joshua and Caleb were the ones who said, no, we're not. And they were singularly focused. And Joshua says, we will serve the Lord. In Hebrews 11:6, it says, "Without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Without faith it is impossible to please him." We can't waffle back and forth. We can't just decide we're going to be all over the place. It's not the way we should be. In Psalm 31:3, it says, "For you are my rock and my fortress, and for your name's sake you lead me and guide me." There's the rock I was talking about. Is Jesus our rock? Do we fully have our trust and our faith in him? Are we giving it all to him, or are we just going to go try to do things our way 1 minute, and then we're going, oh, I'll go back and try to serve you, and then I'm going to go my way. I do that myself. I find myself trying to solve things myself, not going to him the way I ought to sometimes. And that's the warning we're given, not to be that way. And we want to have the boldness like we see here in Hebrews 4:16. It says, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Let us go with confidence, draw near to that throne of grace. It's not to be waffling back and forth. Draw with confidence. So are you here tonight and you've been double-minded toward God? Have you been struggling with your faith, with your hope, and with your obedience? Have you been struggling with your decision to serve him? Have you been trying to decide whether you want to give your life to the Lord or not? We want you to think about that tonight as we bring this message. If you're just going back and forth on that decision, choose this day who you will serve. Do you want to give your life to serve the Lord? There's no better choice that you can make. You don't have to be double-minded anymore about that decision.